There we go. Okay, we're good. Yeah, so if we just want to go around and maybe do a quick introduction, like how you're associated with the steering committee, that would be great. Whoever wants to go first.
I'll go. I'm Beverly Clark. I'm on the Parks and Greenway Advisory Board, and I am an active and avid user of the Greenways, and have been a resident of Raleigh for over 30 years. And I think they're hard to find for a lot of people.
That's great.
I'll go. Kelly McChesney, and I'm here because I am with the Office of Raleigh Arts. I see Sarah's also here, and work on the public art portion of the Raleigh Arts team.
I can go next. This is Sarah Powers with Raleigh Arts, and I get to work with Kelly on public art, but we also oversee the Sertoma and Poland Art Centers, as well as the grant program that funds all the arts and cultural organizations in town with per capita dollars. And avid Greenway user, especially the little secret swales that go through my my neighborhood. So happy to be part of this for lots of reasons.
Hi, this is Alex Brissett. I'm with a group called Oaks and Spokes, which just sort of represents people who are interested in cycling around the city and trying to build a better community of cyclists. So it's a lot of people who use the Greenway for cycling for pleasure and for getting around.
I'm Jason Coupe. I'm a professor at NC State. I'm here on behalf of a group called Black Men Run. Running group sort of centered around the health and well-being of African Americans, sort of situated in the Triangle. So here's a Greenway representative for that group, since we use the Greenway a lot.
Okay, great. That might be everyone, hopefully. So we can go ahead and jump in. So kind of Jared was getting at this, the current trail classifications seem to have a significant amount of overlap and don't have many clear distinctions. So the goal of our new classification system is to kind of simplify everything and identify clear differences between the trail types. Updated classifications will still have some redundancies. However, centering the classifications on user expectations should help with trail design, maintenance, and amenity type and placement. So I will go over again the three different trail classifications that we're proposing. So destination trails is the first one, which examples of those would be Walnut Creek, Crabtree, Rocky Branch. And then scenic trails and loops, which would be like the Neuse River Trail or Lake Johnson, and local trails, which is like Chavis Way or Edwards Mill. So hopefully that gives you guys a little better understanding of what the three types are. So the first question is, what are your general thoughts on creating classifications based upon user expectations?
Let me understand what the term destination is being used for here. Is it because the trail is meant to connect destinations, or the trail itself is considered a destination?
Oh, for the first classification for destination trails,
Yeah.
it's supposed to connect to destinations. So I guess the end result would be the destination.
Thanks.
And Savannah, I hate to make you repeat. What was the third classification?
It's local trails, and I could give a better definition. So for local trails, its user expectation is to link to other trails and access neighborhood. And some examples are Chavis Way and Edwards Mill. I think local trails are something that the Raleigh Greenway plant is like working on. Like it's still probably the most lacking of the three.
Can you explain again what the purpose of classification is?
Oh, sure. Yeah. So it's just to provide users, well, for our proposal, at least, it's to provide users with what to expect when they're on the Greenway Trail. Do they want to ride the Greenway to go to a certain destination, to get to work, school? Do they just want to exercise and have a beautiful view for a scenic trail, or a local trail would just be to get around to like your neighbor, or a quick trip somewhere to the grocery store? And just to repeat the question. So the question is, what are your general thoughts on creating classifications based upon user expectations? And this can be good or bad. We just would love some general input. If you think that is a good direction to go in, to base classifications on user expectations.
I think it's a good idea. I think Greenway means different things to different people. So if we can help provide some of the sort of terminology, sort of universal terms, plus giving those definitions, I think especially in the last few months, seeing so many new users, the stress if you've got a stroller versus you're training for your triathlon, like they're just very different expectations for an experience. So anything that pushes out, here's what to expect when you're using it. And I think the other thing is the parts that aren't utilized, especially those little neighborhood connections, although I would hate for people to tell anyone about them, they are really, I think something like that might help get folks to understand that it's not just this one big, trail, that there's some little or smaller part. They don't have to like spend the day on the Greenway. So it might be a good opportunity for user education in general.
I'm going to disagree a little bit, because if you describe Walnut Creek as a destination trail and you're in downtown Raleigh, the only way you will get to, and using greenways to Walnut Creek, is say Chavis Way or one of the other greenways, so which you've just diminished sort of by calling it a local trail. And I would say some of those local ones, when they connect to the other ones, are just as important. And you can have trails that are discontiguous that I would call local trails, but I think a lot of local trails are really essential links to the other trails, and I would hate to not recognize that. The other part of that, and this was sort of tied to what he was talking about as far as our definition of greenways is all in floodplain and creek, that our Greenway trail map doesn't reflect that either. I think a lot of these kinds of questions, if our map was better and then it showed where linkages were, then some of these questions would kind of get answered, because you would create that expectation for people.
Yeah, I guess I'm thinking about, the comprehensive understanding. If we don't kind of have ways to talk about it as a system, but also as smaller parts, which I think is it's hard to look at the map when you're on the trails. So I think there's so much good opportunity in communicating better. I appreciate that point.
I'll agree a little bit with both of you. Sarah, I like the idea of some sort of classification. So when you're on the trail, you kind of know, you know which trail to choose based on what you're looking to do. But I think that the terms suggested, as Beverly said, they may be a little misleading and they may be a little bit confusing. So yes, there can be kind of, a definition to each of them, but probably trying to find a word or something color coded, I don't know, that helps people understand which trail they're using would be helpful.
I agree that these terms could be a little misleading. I think they confuse the purpose of the trail with the quality of the trail. And calling it a destination trail implies a purpose. And, the local trail maybe is not meant to be for destinations, but it could be, very wide and well paved, or it could be not very wide and kind of intersecting with streets more often. So yeah, I think just we should be careful about the terms we use, not to confuse people. And also, I think just to echo Beverly's point, that local trails can be destination trails. If you have a network, and you know, in my mind, the dream would be that all of the trails are connected everywhere. Then all of the trails can be used to get to destinations, and that distinction doesn't make sense anymore.
So maybe we need a more expanded terminology, because there are connecting trails and destination trails might be very different where you are and what you can, like the grocery store would be a destination, but so might the wetland center, depending on what you're kind of looking to get to.
And what is gained by these definitions, utilizing these definitions? That's, I'm not quite sure.
Yeah, so I think what the main thing that we're trying to do is for users, kind of like you were saying, if it's a mom wanting to go on a walk with her kids with a large stroller, then she knows I can use these trails. If I need to go to work, then I'm going to use this trail.
But I don't think that's the way people do it. I mean, I've seen people drive to the intersection of Crabtree Boulevard and Raleigh Boulevard and park their car, walk across the street, and get on the Crabtree Greenway there. And lots of us cycle on that to go out to Anderson Point into the Neuse River. But it's just as good for walking your dog or walking your stroller, and so, or taking kids over to the marsh area from that same point. I don't.
Is the value more maybe for sort of future users or for current users? Because there might be really different, you know, that there might be some interesting sort of information, you know, what people perceive or understand versus what users really need.
I think that's a great question, Sarah. I think once we get back to the larger chat, you guys will be able to send in questions, and I think Jared would have a better response to that to me. I think my understanding is hopefully it will blend to both, but probably lean towards the future a little bit. But that's a great question. I would definitely ask that.
I think Jason's trying to speak, but it wasn't coming through.
No.
Oh yeah, hi guys. I think I do see that there may be some use for classification. The Neuse, for instance, on Sunday mornings is really difficult to run on because of the bikers. But I guess my feedback with regard to what the best system to do the classifications would be is to consider doing so empirically, right? And so if there are good ways we can think about, if there are trails that folks use for one purpose more than the other, then having those trails be like having that be based on data, right? And I'm sort of to Beverly's point, if it does shake out that everyone's using all of the same trails for all purposes, then perhaps this doesn't make any sense. But if it does bear out, for instance, that there are 3 or 4 trails that are predominantly one thing, then maybe that classification makes more sense. The other thing to think about too, I think, is time, right? So not the usage of all trails, the usage of trails is not going to be constant throughout the week, right? So different trails will have different purposes sort of based on the structure of the day, right? So the recreational trails may be more popular on early Saturday, on early Sunday mornings, but those same trails may in fact be more commuter trails on Tuesday early afternoon. So I guess my thoughts would be that the classification on user with user expectations makes sense if both with regard to time and usage and how the usage changes over time, if that can be based on data. Like if there's a way to get valid empirical measures on how people are using the trail and for what purpose and when those uses might change, then I think it makes sense. Other than that, it may need to be rethought.
Other concern I have about this classification, because it sort of seems like it's good, better, worse. And I would hate to see some of the so-called local trails not get the funding that they needed because they were considered third tier. And that really worries me, because already, you look at the quality of the trail at Bent Tree in North Raleigh and look at it in Walnut Creek, and it's an astonishing difference. And so.
That's a good point.
How would the modes of usage affect the classifications? Like there's ped only, there's ones that are bigger and paved, so bikes, and is that something that would be put into the hopper to
I don't think
decide
any
these?
of them would be exclusive to like a certain type of user. Not that I know of, at least. It's more just the expectation, not like a hard, like only bikes allowed on this trail kind of thing.
But there are parts that aren't bike accessible.
Currently, yes. Mm-hmm.
I wonder if there needs to be only one set of classes, because it sounds like the purpose of classification is to sort of educate users, and you can describe trails in a variety of ways, and there could be very well maintained local trails and poorly maintained commuter trails, so that there's overlappings here that maybe if you kind of add different, if you consider the purpose and as one set of classification and then the quality as a different set of classifications, then you can maybe have a more thorough description of any given trail, as an example.
And Alex brought up a really interesting point, in that whole concept of that, going back to the question, what's the purpose of trail classifications? And if it's to educate users, I can think of a million better ways of communicating with users than getting down to such a micro level as a trail classification. What's there, what's at the end of the road, letting people know. Again, I'm really big on signage, and we don't let people know what's at the end of the trail when they start someplace. But I think that's much more interesting and useful. Like how many hills there are, what is, the topography, as Alex was saying, the quality of the road, that might decide whether I'm going to bike on it or stroller on it versus just walk or run. So.
Yeah, and adding to that, I think it's important, how are these classifications being presented? I could see where, like, it makes sense to have a small number of classifications if you're thinking about a map and the trails have a different color based on their classification. But if you're talking about, using the City of Raleigh website to list all of the different trails, and maybe each trail has its own description, then having this limited classification system doesn't make very much sense.
So it sounds like there's many things that things could be tagged, but avoiding a system that would set up a hierarchy, because the information designers are going to need to do this classification one way or another for mapping for the website. I mean, it will get classified at some point. It sounds really cool to have the topography like trail types, maybe the links or what's at the end, those are going to be really helpful. But the hierarchy could be a liability if we aren't proactive about that. The risk of, elevating certain trails over the other, or giving people a sense one trail is more useful than another.
And that might depend though on who cares about the hierarchy, because I think like if the purpose of classification is also for, say, prioritizing city maintenance, then you have to have a hierarchy, right?
Right, which might be a very different hierarchy than a user would find useful.
So then my question is whether these classifications are only for users, or if they're meant to serve both purposes, if they're also for the city's, internal use.
My
And that's not
understanding
clear to me.
it is for both. That maintenance will be a part of prioritizing maintenance will be a part of this, as it is right now, at least. That, I guess, for example, like a destination trail, if it's something that people need to use to get to work every day, that might prioritize maintenance over a scenic trail that is a loop and it doesn't necessarily need you to get from one place to another. That's my understanding of it.
And that brings up the point, transportation dollars might be invested in certain types of trails where other might be park dollars.
That also echoes, I think, Beverly's point. I didn't know that. Now that's the case, I'm very concerned about equity of resource distribution. As we know, usage of trails will be tied to lots of things that may endogenize how we think about those trail use beyond what they're actually being used for. For instance, a commuter trail may look like it's just representing people using that more for commuting, but it could also mean that area just has higher employment, right? And so now we have a funding system that prioritizes the areas that already have highest employment. So again, I guess I would, I'm sorry, my kids are here. I guess I would double down on the notion that whatever it does needs to be empirical. Like, we have to have data, I think, that is robust about what the trails are being used for and why. And then once we get that sort of particularly quantitative empirical data, we can compare that with things like employment, race, socioeconomic status, to make sure that we aren't marginalizing folks if the trail has to be inevitable. But I would strongly suggest that whatever classification system is used, it needs to be empirical.
Here, here.
Great. These are awesome. Thank you guys so much. And we're going to be with the same group of people for the second breakout session. I really appreciate everyone's responses. I think I got everything written down, and we're going to take this all into consideration. So thank you guys, and I'll see you in a few more minutes.
That was
Right.
fun.
I hit pause on my recording. I did everything I was supposed to do, I think.
All right. Hey, everyone. Welcome back. I'm going to share my screen.
And Savannah, what is it we're supposed to be, what kind of reaction is it we're supposed to be giving you?
Right. So I have a couple questions again. And then my first will just be, what are your first impressions of the new proposed trails? And I'm going to try to bring that map back up. Having a hard time figuring out how to share my screen. Oh, I'm sorry, guys. I am not seeing a button for me to share my screen. Here we go. Okay. Is everyone able to see? There should be a PDF on the left and a Word doc on the right. Great. Okay. I'm going to maximize this. So this is the map that Jared was talking about. The darker green is existing, and the lighter green will be the planned trails. And then this purple color is new trails. So the first question is, what are your initial thoughts about the purple color, the new trails?
How fast can we build them?
Right?
Can you maybe zoom in so that the map fills the screen or as close as possible?
Sure.
May I ask, what are the gray dotted lines?
This
Like
right here, like on the outside.
yeah, kind of the dotted lines. Like I'm looking at the one leading the house, High House Road, things like that. What do those represent?
I would assume roads.
Okay.
They might be trails in other municipalities'
It
system.
could be, yeah, since it's
Okay.
outside of this dark gray is the boundary
Okay, thank
that
you.
we're working on. Yeah.
Cary's got a lot of trails.
That's
So-
true. That's a good point.
I'm sorry, the purple are new proposed?
Exactly. Yes.
Okay.
Dark green, existing, purple, new.
And
Well, there's the green, lighter green with dots. What
Yes, that's planned. So
about?
I can go back a couple so we can. So the dark green is existing, and then they kind of fade as we move into more layers. So dark green existing. This lighter green with the white dots is planned trails.
And did they, and what are these orange hatch marks there? Are they envisioning not doing all, or some of the planned ones perhaps not worth doing, or was that in the evaluation?
So these little orange stubs that you're talking
Yeah.
about, these are removal of some of the existing.
Okay.
I think Jared was saying most of them are like islands or seem to connect to nothing. Just not a big priority, so they're considering removing them. And here we are back to the original map with the new trails in bold purple.
When we talk about planned and proposed, what are they planning or proposing to install? I mean, are these like multi-use trails not accessible to cars? Are they like wide sidewalks? You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's a good question. I know it won't be accessible to vehicles, but it will probably likely be different materials. I guess, well, unless they're downtown, then it could be on a road.
Yeah.
But yeah, it just depends. It's gonna all be different types. Like, I guess what we're trying to get at is, do you think this is the proposed new trails in the purple helping connectivity? Do you think they could be maybe hurting in some ways? Do you see some that maybe don't seem to make sense to you?
Well, without the light green ones, knowing what the priority is for those going into play, then it's really hard to endorse or be opposed to a purple one without knowing if that light green one is gonna, is in the 5-year plan, the 10-year plan. There's a no year plan, there are very few miles being added right now.
What would also be nice to help decide, I think, would be a map with sort of some density measure to see if in GIS you can just sort of color code the density of the map, and if we could overlay this on that, I think it may help make some more sense of it.
Jason, do you mean population density?
Yeah, yep,
Okay.
population density.
Just wanted to make sure.
Yeah, it could be population density or housing density. I imagine those things are probably pretty similar, but I think either or. And then how that density is changing, I think would help make sense too. Proposed trails, particularly for the light green ones, if you know those might be easier to say, yeah, they make sense if they're in areas that are becoming more populated / more dense as Raleigh grows over time. Does that make sense? So I guess similar point to the earlier one about sort of trail use being sort of based empirically. I think the same thing would apply here.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, and something that Jared or Ashley could do pretty easily and send that out along with these other maps. So I'll make sure that they get something like that.
I would say that I'm happy to see in the kind of Millbrook area, it looks like things are being very well connected to Crabtree Creek Trail. I don't know if it's clear where I'm talking about, kind of to the east of Atlantic Avenue, Millbrook. It's hard to read the text here.
Yeah, and I think the point of this too is kind of like a high level, not to get too in the weeds of specific streets.
Yeah.
But that's a great point. Yeah, like Northeast Raleigh connection.
Yeah. The point that I made earlier is that, you know, at least in my mind, a dream is that everything is connected and you can get almost anywhere you want from anywhere else. And, you know, I don't know if that'll ever really be the case, but at least to the north, it looks like that situation is improving. And being able to connect to the really major trails like Crabtree Creek and Walnut Creek is really important. And it looks like these are trying to do that. I mean, with all the caveats that the other people pointed out.
I think to get better information about the equity dimension, you could overlay this on a map with poverty level as well to get a better idea of how the trails do on that. I think, you know, I've been in Raleigh a half a decade, so I got some idea, but again, it'd be nice to have that sort of based in some better data than I think what we think we know about the city, to sort of have it be sort of behind it on the map so we can sort of see. The map will sort of highlight if there are big gaps in access with regard to equity.
That's a great idea. The city can do that.
Mm-hmm.
TJ McCourt, I know, spearheaded a great GIS project to bring in vulnerability indexes and all sorts of great demographic overlays that can be layered in.
I mean, I think just to me, as someone who has lived in areas both in the north, you know, and kind of downtown, I remember when I lived in Youngsville, I was always trying to figure out how I could bike into work because the traffic was so bad. And this is like a dream come true because it looks like it kind of picks up in a new point, like at a place where you could park and then ride down. There are a couple of points that I see that are planned that seem to end nowhere. And I guess I had some questions about that. There's maybe that's just like it's getting as far as it can get, and then perhaps in the future it could be finished. Is that kind of the idea?
I would think so, or maybe they hit like a neighborhood where it's safer to bike.
Okay.
These were developed before the planned ones in the lighter green were developed before we got into the process, so I don't know specifically.
Okay. And I know in some areas like Southeast Raleigh, for example, they're doing a lot of streetscape projects where they're doing multi-use paths. Mm-hmm. So is this in consideration of kind of linking up to those paths in some way?
That is definitely something that is being considered.
Okay.
Okay, great. I don't think we have a ton more time. So another question was how the proposed Greenway Trail network fits into the transportation system. That might be something that's a little difficult to tell from the map. But if you guys have any opinions on that, please feel free to share.
Be curious to see the overlay with BRT and also some of the proposed transit corridors in the 2030 plan. Or not corridors, but the hubs
Yes, that's great.
and how they compare to those.
It seems like it would be these additions, some of them may be on roads, as people have said, and it's really important that it be a blend. I think people don't come on the greenways to just, like a Montreal, just to get from here to there, but they also want that natural experience, and to have it be a mix of both, where you can get someplace in a fairly direct way and then also use part of a true greenway to get the rest of the way, is a win-win.
Yeah, I think that's a great point.
Sort of related to that, and again, this is just sort of anecdotal and off the top of my head, so the data will be better, but along 64 going east, as 64 sort of curves northeast, is a pretty dense traffic corridor. And there, I don't know what the BRT plans are for that space, but there seems to be a gap there too with regard to the transit. So basically, you know, a gap with regard to trails there too. So if you just go straight east to downtown along 64 and curve it up until you get to like New Hope Road, that area is pretty dense, and there doesn't seem to really be a trail. So it's sort of like a dead spot between the Noose Trail and downtown. So like the same gap doesn't exist going west. So taking New Bern, Hillsborough straight west towards Cary, there looks to be like the proposed purple trail to extend downtown to like where Meredith is. So it's sort of the same thing going east from downtown, I think would help, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. Okay, guys, I'm sorry that was super fast, but I do appreciate everyone's responses. This has been great. And I'm hoping to get these maps to you with the overlays that you requested. Thank you, guys.